So my parents were crack addicts. I used to live in a motorhome and I was a college dropout. But despite all this, I scaled my online business to $250,000 months within 3 years, all by writing tweets in my underwear by the age of 25. I hacked the system to get paid by my own employer.
I just feel like a loser, you know? It's crazy. I only made fucking 20K last month.
Now, this video isn't to brag, but my intentions are to show you what is possible. Living a life of complete freedom. Waking up when you want, living where you want, and working on what you want. And if a guy like me who came from nothing can start a successful online business, so can you. So in this video, I'm gonna break down the one secret I owe it all to, and I guarantee it's not what you think, but telling you this one secret won't make sense until I give you context on my story. Nice to meet you. My name's Dakota Robertson, and this is a quick intro to who I am and how I went from $0 to a 7-figure online business within 3 years. To give you an idea of who I am, we need to rewind back 25 years to when it all started. I was born January 2nd, 1998 in a small Canadian city called Kelowna, and I was the second born, but since my older brother was born with a serious lung condition called cystic fibrosis, my mother wasn't able to handle raising him. So my brother was given to my grandparents to be raised from day one. Now, 3 years later, when I was born, she wasn't gonna let the same thing happen to me. So my mother gave my father an ultimatum: continue smoking crack or help raise your newborn son. And let me tell ya, crack is one hell of a drug. So he left. And that choice changed the trajectory of my life forever. Because growing up, my mom and I were super close. I was her world and she was mine. And to be honest, I was the stereotypical mama's boy. And because of this, I lacked many masculine traits. So growing up, this made life a struggle. I was super shy, sensitive, and if I was away from my mom too long, I would cry. And as you'll see, this snowballed into many more problems. But around the age of 4, my mom met a man and they quickly hit it off, started dating, and he moved in with my mom and I. And to support us, my mom was working 2 jobs, day and night, as a waitress. Now, her new boyfriend, he was a drug dealer and he wasn't the greatest role model, but we were a family, a broke family of 3. So for a couple years, we lived in a motorhome and bounced around from motel to motel in Alberta, Canada. During that time, a night out to the movies meant sneaking past the employees to get in for free. All my clothes were used and we always bought the no-name brand of food. And I even remember one particular Christmas where I got a small box of used toys in a cardboard box from the thrift store. Wasn't even wrapped. And that's when I knew Santa wasn't real. But despite this, we got by. And when I was 6, we moved back to my hometown, Kelowna. And since my mom was constantly working to support us, her boyfriend would watch over me after school. And it was a back and forth relationship between us. And I constantly craved his approval. But he also had a dark side. Often he was emotionally distant, cruel, and I wished he wasn't in my life. But one thing I do appreciate is that he sparked my love for reading. And he made sure I was always reading books. And because of this, I fell in love with stories and constantly went through books. And other times, he would need to take care of some business and deal drugs. So he took me along with him. Kind of like the movie Ride Along, but for drug dealing.
I'm gonna take you on a ride along.
So throughout my childhood, he took me on tons of drug deals, often being left in the car by myself for hours with nothing to do but stare out a window. And those were some of the times I felt most alone in life. While other kids were hanging out, having fun, playing video games, I was sitting alone in a car, staring out a window with just my thoughts. And eventually, I was put into after-school activities. So jujitsu, gymnastics, swimming, and the one I hated most of all, dance class. Fast forward to the age of 8. My mom was a hustler and started a small business selling food and drinks on the side of the road, and she named it the Family Stop. And she didn't have a business license, so a SWAT team quickly raided her business on the side of the road and shut her down. Just kidding. Cop came, said, hey, you can't do that. You need a business license. So she's like, okay, all right. So my mom went back to the drawing board, quit her job, got a business license, and started running a hot dog cart downtown. And quickly, she saw success and scaled to running a few hot dog carts downtown. At one point, I remember her sitting me down and telling me, Dakota, never work for someone else. You'll never be successful that way. Start your own business when you grow up. And At the time, I brushed off her words. I was like, yeah, whatever. But it wasn't until years later that I realized how influential she was on the trajectory of my life. Now, a year later from that point, I was 9 and my biological father made one of his annual visits to see my brother and I. And this particular visit, he brought presents. My brother got a PlayStation 2 and I got an Xbox. And instantly I became addicted. My Xbox was my escape from life and allowed me to become anyone I wanted in these video games. And the only thing I wanted to do when I got home was play video games. And on weekends, it was 14 hours of gaming. And since my mom wasn't much of a cook, double stuffed Oreos became a large part of my diet growing up. So pairing that with my video game addiction, I got chubby pretty quick. And when you're young, kids like to point that out. And it started with subtle remarks, but then turned to more blatant name calling. So shout out to the dude who called me Chubby Chunker. Never forgot that. Stuck with me. Thanks, bro. But since I was shy, I didn't have the confidence to stand up for myself. And I based so much of my self-worth on what other people thought of me that I internalized what others said about me. Their narratives became my narrative. I played that in my head for years. You're fat. You're a loser. You are not good enough. And as a result, that shy kid adopted the identity of someone with zero self-worth. I went every day feeling like everyone was judging me. And it got to the point where I would just constantly cry. I woke up every day and I didn't like who I was. And this is the thing about addiction. Video games and food were a huge contributor to my despair, but they were also my escape. So things stayed that way for a couple of years. But when I was 12, there was a moment that changed everything. I was in math class and the teacher was giving a lesson. And there came a point where she paused. There was a moment of silence. And in the back of the class, everyone could hear a kid quietly talking to someone else. All you could hear in the room was Dakota, that fat kid. And my face burned bright red with embarrassment. At that moment, I felt isolated from the entire world, and I could see and feel everyone's eyeballs on me. I wanted to burst into tears. But that was one of the best things that ever happened to me, because that was the moment of maximum pain. It was the moment I had enough of people's shit, and that pain turned into anger, and that anger turned into my fuel. Shortly after, my mom's boyfriend and I started going to YMCA group fitness classes. A few times a week before school, we would wake up at 5 a.m. and we'd get yelled at by a guy named Jeff. Jeff was a 6'2" jack dude that ran a fitness boot camp at the YMCA. And for that 1 hour in that boot camp, I would work my ass off, face red and dripping in sweat. And I replayed all the times people hated on me, all the times people called me fat, all the times people laughed at me. I became possessed. There were many times I worked out so hard that I had to run to the bathroom to throw up. And I fucking loved it, because after each class, I killed a little part of my old identity. It became my obsession for the following months. And lo and behold, I saw changes in my body. I remember looking in the mirror after 5 months of consistent training and seeing a bit of a V in my waistline, and I just stared at myself in the mirror for 20 minutes with a huge smile on my face. And I was so proud, because all those hours of hard work were paying off. And that's when I became really addicted to working out. But as things were going well in that area, a new downward spiral began. My mom found out her boyfriend was cheating on her. They broke up. At the time, they had 2 kids together. My little sisters were probably around the age of 2 or 3, and it destroyed my mom. She placed so much happiness into him, and it shattered her world. They stopped living together. He took custody of my little sisters, and it was just my mom and 13-year-old me. And this is where things really took a turn for the worse. The people she surrounded herself with were absolutely horrible influences. She was always trying to help people who were going through a hard time in their life, and they took advantage of her kindness. She gave homeless people jobs. She loaned friends money. Her employees stole from her. And to cope with her whole situation going on in life, she numbed herself. She started smoking a lot of weed, and eventually weed turned to alcohol, and alcohol turned to coke. And for most of the day, I was left to fend for myself. I took the bus to school. I took it back home. I made all my own meals with what was lying around the house, which was often bread, butter, peanut butter, cereal, all that fun stuff. And at that point, I was just raising myself. And there were many late nights she would stumble home high or drunk, and I had to make sure she was okay, made it to bed, and was sleeping soundly. But the last straw happened when I was 14. I just couldn't take it anymore. I took the bus down to my grandparents' place and asked if I could live with them. And I'm forever grateful that they said yes. Now, a part of me felt like I was abandoning my mom, but I just couldn't live like that with her. So from that point forward in my life, I lived with my grandparents and my brother, and things were good for a while. At that point, I lost my extra weight, started lifting weights with my brother, started putting on some muscle, and more importantly, I started getting attention from the girls at school. So when I entered high school, I was known as the Jack Kid. I was on the football team and part of the popular crowd, but I didn't feel it. I conditioned my inner narrative as a fat loser for years. So even though I transformed my outer appearance, I still felt like that kid on the inside. And I think my football coach saw this and took a liking to me because he was always pushing me to be better. He was that strong masculine role model in my life at that time and taught me a ton about discipline and consistency. In grade 12, I was one of the captains of the football team and was awarded top academic player and also the MVP, but I wasn't at a good enough level to go pro, so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after high school. So I just followed in my brother's footsteps. I graduated high school early and got into electrical program to become an electrician. I figured if I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, I might as well make some decent money in the meantime while I figured it out. So during that electrical program, I became best friends with a guy called Nathan, and he played a huge role in the direction of my life because he introduced me to books like Think and Grow Rich and Rich Dad, Poor Dad. People hate on those books, but they were revolutionary to me because they changed the way I saw life going forward. I realized that wealth was attainable and I didn't have to go down the traditional path of getting a degree and working my entire life and praying to God that I can retire. So I became hooked on self-development books and was reading one every week or two. Eventually, I started listening to podcasts all the time as well, and they created this burning desire in me to become wealthy. I didn't know how, but I was going to make it work. Then reality hit me in 2017. I was 19. I started working in the oil and gas industry as an electrician. I'd work 12 to 14 hours a day in the freezing cold, in the middle of nowhere, in Alberta, and I was surrounded by people who were miserable. All I did was work, eat, and sleep. And being one of the youngest guys on the construction site, the older guys always gave me a hard time. And this was one of the darkest periods of my life because I was on the brink of depression. I didn't know what to do. So I started journaling at the end of the day. Pen and paper became my therapist. And I started to realize I needed more out of my life. Sure, I was making decent money, but I felt empty. I needed to make a change. So when I heard on a podcast that the host went on a trip to Vietnam and it changed his life, I was set on going on a solo backpacking trip to Southeast Asia for 3 months. In May of 2017, I booked my ticket for December 6th of that year, but that summer changed my life. For the past 3 years of that part of my life, my mother continued to go downhill. Cocaine turned into full-blown crack addiction. I would receive phone calls late at night throughout high school from my mom asking me to pick her up from whatever party she was at because she was too messed up to drive. And it got to the point where she spent her life savings on drugs, well over $150,000. By the time I was 19, she was homeless, and there were multiple times where I had to visit her in the ER at the hospital, once from an overdose and the other was from a very severe car crash. And I watched the most beautiful and important person in my life go from my beautiful mother to someone that was unrecognizable. Then August 10th of 2017, when I was at the gym, I got a call and it was my grandpa. I could hear him slightly cracking up, which was unusual because he was a very stern man, and he asked me to come home. And when I probed for more information, he was very vague. All he had to say was that it had to do with my mom. And just come home, he said. And that drive was the longest 15 minutes of my life. I didn't want to admit it, but deep down, I knew what was waiting for me. I opened the door to my house to find a police officer standing with my brother and grandparents. And I took one glance at my brother and broke down into tears. My fear collided with reality. She was gone. Fentanyl laced crack overdose. She got into the shed outside the house she used to rent from my grandparents to smoke crack with her friends. And we later found out that they did nothing to try to save her, didn't try to resuscitate, didn't phone anything out, didn't phone anything in, just left there to rot for 3 days in the summer heat before her body was found. No goodbyes, no happy endings, just dead. My brother and I visited that shed the day after, and I could see the stain of her body on the foam bedding she died on, and maggots crawled around where her corpse used to lie, and I just felt numb inside. And for the months that followed, I carried a ton of guilt. I was the only person in her life that was close to her, and I felt like I abandoned her the day I went to live with my grandparents. And logically, I know that was the right thing to do, but it was something I carried with me for a very long time. And I knew I needed a change. So I was still determined to go on that trip to Asia. So fast forward to December, I boarded the plane, and my best friend Nathan tagged along for the first 2 months of that trip. And I'm happy I went on that trip because those were some of the best times of my life. I went to Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. And during that time, I shot a rocket launcher, traveled to places they've never seen white people before, and met so many amazing people. And it really fundamentally changed my life because I realized my biggest value in life is freedom. Freedom to wake up when I want, live where I want, live how I want. It lit a fire under my ass to live life on my terms. I knew I needed to take the advice from my mother that she told me all those years ago and become an entrepreneur. So when I got back from that trip in February 2019, I went back to work as an electrician, working 12-hour days, hating my job, but I became obsessed with learning about different ways to make money. So during that 3-year period, I hopped around from job to job, server, delivery driver, medic, security guard. And in my free time, I would educate myself by listening to podcasts, reading books, watching free YouTube videos. And I hated working jobs. I always felt like a cog in the machine. I didn't work the same job for over 6 months because I'd get bored and move on to something else. During those 3 years, I also experimented with a bunch of side hustles: Amazon FBA, iPhone repair, eBay flipping, blogging, all of that stuff. And I quit each one because just like the jobs I would work, I'd get bored, lose interest, and move on to the next shiny object. But when September 2020 rolled around, everything changed. At this time, I was in my second year of college studying to become a high school English and psychology teacher. College was my backup plan till I figured out what I wanted to do with my life. But on September 24th, 2020, I was scrolling Twitter to keep up with the crypto news when I came across someone selling a $40 ebook. It was a guide on how to grow an audience on Twitter. I never considered the possibility of building a brand online, but something told me to take the leap and try it out. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't have the best start to Twitter. My account was an anonymous account that was a mix between philosophy, fitness, and motivation. It was named Philosophy of Fit, and it was super cringe. Now, although my account barely grew, the biggest benefit was being introduced to a small part of the internet that most people don't know about. And this was known as Money Twitter, a collective of young entrepreneurs talking about their journey, making money online. And that's when I was introduced to people like Dan Koh and other big names you might know. And instantly, I fell in love. It was a community of people who didn't fit in with the societal narrative of going into debt, get a degree, work until you're 65, and retire hoping that you saved enough to live comfortably until you die. These were the black sheep of society who wanted to live a life of financial, mental, and physical freedom. But I was still a long way from living that life. So after 3 months of trying to grow on Twitter and many courses, I realized I needed to change my strategy. While I only grew to 750 followers in 3 months, I saw guys with accounts less than a month old getting to 1,000 followers. I knew something was missing, but I was determined to make it work. So I studied the big Twitter accounts I looked up to, and I noticed a pattern. They were personal brands with a skill. They gave you a reason to like them by who they were and gave you a reason to value them by what they taught, and they were valued because they gave value. So I followed in their footsteps. I looked at what skills were in demand in the marketplace and which one of those skills were aligned with my interests. And at the time, I was learning web design on the side, but I knew copywriting would be a great complementary skill. And if you don't know what copywriting is, it's persuasive writing that gets people to take a certain action, like click something, buy something, or follow someone. I knew I had a lot to learn, so like fitness, I became obsessed with studying it. And what better way to be accountable to learning a skill than posting on social media? Not only is there that societal pressure to show up every day, but you have to teach concepts in simple terms because of the 280 character limit. So I created a new account niched down to writing, but this time the pressure was on. I needed to make this work. When December 4th, 2020 came around, I knew there was no going back because I couldn't take the pain of living a life where I wasn't excited about my future. I felt like I was on a track quickly going nowhere. So I dropped out of my second year of college. I quit my job at Domino's. I made the biggest bet of my life. Fuck it, I will make this work, I told myself. I didn't know how, but I was determined to make a living from Twitter. So every day for the next 7 months, I wrote, got better at social media, and grew to around 4,000 followers. But there was only one problem. My bank account was shrinking. I was eating into my savings, and I knew I needed to make things happen quick. So I did what any rational person would do. Spent thousands of dollars. I know, sounds crazy, but let me explain. I reached out to a big account in the space I looked up to, Danco, because I knew he had a coaching offer on how to monetize social media. So I pulled the trigger and invested $6,000 when I only had $8,000 in my bank account. Over 4 months, I went through a few iterations of how I was going to monetize Twitter. I originally thought copywriting plus web design, but I was more intrigued by the idea of this new industry few people knew about, a Twitter ghostwriter. Basically someone who writes content for someone and grows their social media. I was getting good at growing my Twitter following, so I thought, why not do it for somebody else? Plus, putting ghostwriter in your bio or telling people you're a ghostwriter sounds cool and mysterious, so that was an added bonus. So November 2021 rolled around and I launched my ghostwriting offer. And to my amazement, I got applications for my service right away. But I was scared shitless of getting rejected by prospects. Hell, even the adrenaline that was being triggered would physically make me shake before sales calls. It was kind of hilarious. And I fumbled a lot of these sales calls, but to my surprise, I landed a couple. First, it was a $3,000 a month client, then a $5,000 a month client, and then another $3,000 a month client. With only 5,000 followers and in my first 28 days as a ghostwriter, I hit $11,000 a month. That's when my life changed forever. I realized it really was possible to live a life of freedom on my terms. It wasn't just a bunch of people talking about making money online and it was some big scam. And I didn't need a degree or be some kind of an expert, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. The months that followed were a roller coaster of emotions. Many failures, many wins, and many lessons. I lost some clients, I struggled with imposter syndrome, and I had to step outside my comfort zone to learn about business. But I stayed consistent. I kept paying for mentors in sales, marketing, copywriting, performance, and just leveling up. And soon, $11,000 a month turned into $20,000, $20,000 turned into $30,000, $30,000 turned into my first $50,000 a month. So I wrote for 8-figure founders, best-selling authors, and even adult film stars, all within 9 months of launching my social media ghostwriting business. And the more I wrote for clients and myself, the more I understood how to grow on social media. And in 3 years, I grew on platforms like Instagram, LinkedIn, and Threads, amassing a total following of over 500,000 people. But while my ghostwriting business was successful, I knew there was a bigger opportunity. I had this big audience, but I never sold anything to them. Now, I considered a few things, but after a talk with my friend Andre, the thing that made the most sense was teaching people what I had the most experience in, growing on social media and monetizing with ghostwriting. And at that point, I had 2 case studies of people I helped. Talon Simmons, who I helped go from college teacher making $42K a year to hitting $70,000 a month, and my friend Clifton, who I helped go from local salesman to hitting $80,000 a month with ghostwriting. So now it was time to take it on a mass scale. So when January 2023 rolled around, I launched my program teaching everything I knew. And I will admit, I was scared shitless. The inner kid in me was nervous about the cohort failing. Thoughts ran through my head like, what if nobody joins the program? What if I can't get them results? What if I'm a bad teacher? And again, like every new endeavor in my life, I felt like an imposter. I felt like I wasn't good enough. My ego was in jeopardy. What would it say about me if I failed? But I also asked myself, what if everything worked out? What if the demand was high? What if I got the people in my cohort great results? And what if everything just worked out? So mid-January, I launched my new offer, and that cohort, I made $155,000 in a month. With payment plans, it ended up being a total of like $300,000. But what was more amazing was the fact that I was helping others live a life in accordance to my biggest value in life, freedom. It was fulfilling for me to see people quit their jobs, go all in on social media ghostwriting, and just travel the world, do whatever they want. So fast forward to today, my last cohort did $250,000 in a month and a total value of around $500,000. So this next one I expect to do probably close to $500,000 in a month. And again, I don't say this to impress you, but to show you what is possible. Just a few years ago, I was a business newbie, broke, purposeless and didn't know how accessible the life I wanted was. And you and I are told to do what we're told and hope we can settle for a decent life after we retire. But screw that. I mean, if you're willing to put in consistent work for 2 to 5 years, you can live your dream life. You don't need a degree. And the one reason I can wake up whenever I want, travel anywhere in the world, network with 7 and 8 figure entrepreneurs, and do whatever I want is writing. And I'm not talking about the outdated 2,000 word minimum essay type writing they teach in high school. I'm talking about persuasive writing online, because while society is pushing everyone to get a degree and become a doctor or a lawyer, there's a silent revolution happening. I mean, the whole world is moving online. You've seen this push accelerated in the past 3 years. Online fitness trainers, online e-commerce stores, online therapists, everything and everyone is moving online, which means all these people need to capture attention online to get customers. And who are they going to turn to? Those who can capture eyeballs and monetize them with words, aka writers. Because writing is just concentrated thought. And if you can think, you'll become absolutely deadly and easily get ahead of 99% of people. Because the better you write, the clearer you think. And if you can think clear, you become more articulate, which affects your relationships. You become more persuasive, which affects the amount of money you make. You become more intelligent, which affects the opportunities presented to you. Apply this to building an online audience, and the possibilities are endless. And for the people who say, why learn to write when I can use ChatGPT, bro? If I gave a toddler the keys to a Ferrari, would it know how to drive it? The toddler would probably run over some poor old lady and crash into a Starbucks. So the same is true for those using ChatGPT without understanding writing. It may spit out some text, but you'll have no idea whether it's any good, persuasive, or not. So despite English degrees being near useless, there is no higher ROI skill to learn than online persuasive writing in today's world. So there you have it, the quick and dirty of my story. Maybe not so quick, but it's a story I look back with a lot of gratitude and a lot of appreciation for the people that helped guide me along the way and steer me in the right direction. And for anyone that might resonate with this story and feel like they're not in the place they want to be in life and they feel like they have a ton more potential, they're just not reaching, I would encourage you to just dip your toes in entrepreneurship or whatever you want to get involved in, and just put yourself in those uncomfortable situations and slowly increase that threshold over time, because you'll notice the more you push yourself in that one direction, the more you're going to develop the traits to withstand the stressors or the challenges. And over a long enough time horizon, if you're consistent, you're going to be a completely new person. And for those of you wondering about this whole writing online thing and making money, you can go ahead and click this video right here, or maybe right here, and I will go into ghostwriting and everything you need to know about making money online and step-by-step process.